Welcome to the second episode of Everyone's a Hypocrite, They Just Don't Know It. I am a Jaded Gamer, and today I will be looking into the rapidly declining spin-off series, Dark Souls. More specifically, the stagnation of it that started with the very first entry. So let's go through the three main entries, and touch upon Bloodborne and Demon Souls as we go. Let's begin with an overview of my Souls history, give you some more perspective as to where I'm coming from. My first experience with the series was with Demon Souls and watching my brother play what I thought was a medieval hack and slash at the time. When he was done, I had a go. A week later I finished it, and it was a gaming experience I hadn't had in nearly 2 decades. Finally, a game that didn't treat me like a child. Later on, I heard about Dark Souls, and when it came out on PC, I decided to give it a go, hearing it was the sequel to a game I really enjoyed. Disappointment followed with the worst PC port I've ever played. Shameless plug. Moving on. I tried DS Fix, but I couldn't get it to work, so I bunkered down, made the best of the bad situation, and finished the game in a week, feeling all the better for it having conquered the horrific controls. What's that? Why didn't I buy a controller? Because I don't want to reduce these two wonderful machines attached to my torso down to two clunky thumbs that are designed to do nothing but grip. That's why. When Dark Souls 2 came out, I waited 2 weeks for patches and whatnot before buying the PC release, being sure that it was playable. Much to my surprise, the PC controls in the game are still the best in the series. It made perfect use of the mouse, allowing for smooth pan and zoom, and even being able to differentiate between single and double clicks. As for the game itself, it is my favourite, if only because, like Demon Souls, they at least tried to do something different, and not just copy the one prior, for the most part. Dark Souls 3 had much fanfare about it, and this worried me greatly. The series had gone from something niche to bro-cunt fanboy levels of popularity. This time I waited a month before throwing my money away, knowingly. Thankfully the controls worked out of the box, but you could no longer use double clicks, which was a sign of things to come. Demon Souls set up a wonderfully dark and fear-filled world full of dark corridors and horrific monstrosities. It was the first game in about 2 decades that I felt challenged by, where if I failed it was my fault, for the most part. Even today it holds a mystery for me. Every time I play, I feel like I will uncover something new about it. Demon Souls being the key inspiration for Dark Souls, it is mostly excusable, to be fair, when Dark Souls was being made, that the team used previous ideas in the game they had previously developed. That is how sequels work. I get that. I have an IQ higher than 60. You take a winning formula, expand upon it, and that's what they did, greatly expanding the end game and creating a world that felt like it had a history to it. Overall, the game feels mostly like its own thing. Dark Souls 2, though misguided at times, at least tried to separate itself from the first by placing it in a completely different world, the world of Drangleic, but sadly they couldn't help but force in references both plain to see and others less obvious, such as the embarrassing Sunbros Covenant, or the pieces of the Lord vessel underneath the mansion. I was under the impression this was supposed to be a world separate from the previous one. I guess I was wrong. At least the areas were more varied than the previous games, even if they don't link together terribly well, which with hindsight seems like a wonderful game design accident, and frankly nothing more, because they've clearly shown they can't be bothered or are simply unable to replicate it in any manner. Being developed back to back, it is unsurprising that these two games feel very similar, so much so both games look and play almost identically. I understand that Bloodborne is meant to be more fast-paced, punishes defensive play, but when the core ideas of a Dark Souls game, wait and punish, are compromised by changing the way every previous game is played, it starts to become a problem. As mentioned earlier, Dark Souls and the second both at least tried to do something different. Dark Souls 3, on the other hand, takes elements wholesale from Dark Souls and Demon Souls, doing nothing new or even interesting with it while throwing in opponents straight out of Bloodborne's aggression mentality at the player in mass numbers through the entire game. Enemies that crowd up on you and attack relentlessly, never exhausting their pool of stamina, effectively removing the wait and punish mechanic that has been akin to the other games, turning it to something more along the lines of mindless attack spamming. Even with the changes to stamina consumption and the way armor weight affects your character, requiring much less thought from the player, it still does nothing to counter the overwhelming enemies. Even the first enemies you see in Demon Souls employ more strategy than anything you'll find in Dark Souls 3. Take the Drakes for example. They clearly show what they're going to do if you pay just the slightest amount of attention, and you can adjust for it. Even though they do have a rather quick attack cycle, it's more than possible to predict, wait, and punish. On the more technical side, the hitboxes in the game are a series low, though frankly they've never been that great, and an industry embarrassment in my humble opinion. I cannot count the amount of times I have been struck, grabbed, or simply pushed off the edge due to the lazy effort in properly sizing and testing the hitboxes correctly. There are also numerous enemies in the game that have seemingly been programmed to lift their weapon quickly, then wait, tricking you into dodge rolling, and then they bring it down just as your invincibility frames expire. This happens so often it can only be intentional, even when different timings and repetitive tries have failed to show any different outcomes. Dark Souls 3 also fails to include any unique areas in the game. They're all literal copy-pastes of what you've seen previously, be it trying to recreate the Anor Londo roof paths, swamp after swamp after swamp, again and again and again. It all just bleeds into one another, resulting in thoroughly uninteresting environments that all feel extremely linear to the point where it outdoes Dark Souls 2. This type of design also bleeds into every single boss fight, all of which are either direct copies of previous fights, i.e. the monk from Demon Souls, what's his face from Dark Souls DLC, can't even fucking remember, it's the one with the wolf or something, I don't know. So uninterested I can't even be bothered looking it up. What I'm getting at is every single boss fight is the same. You roll around like a fucking idiot, tapping it on the arse every now and then until you win. That's it. There is nothing more to it. There is no strategy. There is no interest beyond that. Contrast this with the Fool's Idol from Demon Souls. or Maiden Astraea. Both those fights require you to think differently, it's not just straight up attacking. And it's because of that that those fights stand out from the other ones in the game that are just straight up attacking, and are less memorable because of it. Sequels are too often treated poorly, in most cases just adding an additional number to them and shipping. I think we've seen that a fair bit with prevalence of FPS games. And from a marketing standpoint, that's perfectly acceptable. What I'm getting at is that Dark Souls 3 plays it so safe that it feels like the team pull a Call of Duty. And by that I mean a game that wanks off the fan base, makes them feel powerful without requiring them to put any effort in to get that gratifying feeling. Just like every Call of Duty sequel, it has looked better, it has felt better to play, but it is ultimately less satisfying. Dark Souls 3 feels like it has been dumbed down to pander to the hordes of gamers who just don't care to be challenged by today's media and would rather just be handed a win. To say I was let down by a series that had previously pushed me to better my gaming skills would be putting it lightly. Ultimately, it's a game that refused to innovate, fell back hard on what it had done previously, and is by far the least memorable. It's a game that pulled a Call of Duty on an entire fan base, got away with it, and will likely do it again. I grew up playing Surtech Wizardry, Apogee, Commander Keen's, LucasArts Adventures, Sid Meier's Civilization, Ultima, and many more games from companies synonymous with their consistent quality and challenge of their products. Seeing what gaming has become makes me long for games that challenge me, like they used to, like how Demon's Souls did. Maybe I'm just a jaded individual who can't let the past go. Perhaps I just expect more from my interactive audiovisual media products that have shown me what they can be when the developers are not just motivated by a quick buck. I hope this was in some way enjoyable for you, or maybe it just provided background noise to listen to while you focus on something else, like I do when I play games that fail to hold my interest. I'm a Jaded Gamer. Thank you for watching. Why do I even bother?